The following is brought to you by Total Seal Piston Rings, the leader in ring seal technology. TotalSeal.com. Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal. We have had so many greats on this podcast. Hopefully you are all subscribed and ready to go. Of course, my name is Joe Costello, and once again, we are joined by the Director of Technical Sales over there at Total Seal Piston Rings, Mr. Keith Jones. Keith, welcome back. Another episode.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Joe. Hopefully everything's going well in Florida, and all of your listeners, our listeners out there, are safe and trying to do some things at home and getting through these times, these new times that we have to deal with today. And again, as I said, I hope everybody out there is safe.
Couple of great episodes in the archive. Lake Speed Jr., just legend after legend after legend. And if you're an aspiring engine builder, a DIY engine builder, or someone who works in a big-time race shop who just wants to keep up with this world, Hidden Horsepower is the place to be. And on this episode, we're going to keep the momentum going with a genuine legend of just about all forms of motorsport. The old master himself, Mr. Ed Pink, will be joining us just seconds from now. Keith, just talk a little bit about it. I, as a drag racing fan, know the logo, know the name, know the relationships, know the rivalry, but Ed Pink has been doing it for a long time at the highest of levels.
Absolutely. I mean, how can you not respect Ed? I mean, everything he's done, all the accomplishment, all the accolades. For some of the younger listeners out there that may not, they know the name, but they don't know the name, you need to Google it and see the things that this man's done. It'll stand your hair on end. I know Ed, of course, from, as mentioned before, from the Chicago area originally, and hanging out at Arnie Beswick's shop, and know Ed, for the drag racing days, the Think Pink, the Elephant, that Hemi. But then it goes so far beyond that, into, NASCAR and midget engines, dirt. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's just, like I say, what a storied career. And the one thing that I always have to say, and I'd mentioned this earlier before we started talking, I said to Joe, Ed's been doing this forever, and yet we get on the phone, and to this day, still, what's new? What can we do better? How can we make it better? Even if he's working on an old flathead, what can we do to get the ring drag down? What can we do to improve the ring seal? And that just speaks volumes about Ed. I hate to say it, that's all you need to know, because there's a lot more, but, at a guy that's done everything he's done, he's still looking to make it better.
Cannot wait. Also a Korean War veteran. That tells you he also served his country in addition to chasing his dreams. And now let's bring him on, the legend himself, Mr. Ed Pink on Hidden Horsepower. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on with you guys.
Oh, we are thrilled to have you on. And drag racing, of course, near and dear to our hearts. But your career, just from dry lakes to midgets to sports cars to drag racing, you've had a couple of different runs in different styles of racing. Your longevity, you've been able to stay interested, stay relevant, stay working for all this time. What is the reason that the mechanical engine has attracted you so much that you made a life out of it?
Well, probably the biggest reason would be that I never stuck with one thing. Originally in the 40s, I started with dry lakes, and then Bonneville, and then drag racing, and then Indy cars, and then midgets, sprint car, Silver Crown, the off-road racing, the boats, the drifting, and each one kept my juices rejuvenated. So I never got bored. If I would have stayed in drag racing only, I'd have been gone a long time ago. But being that I got to go into all these different venues of racing, it just kept me vitalized all the time. I love the engines. I love the people did the work for, and every challenge was a new challenge, and that's what kept me going
Now,
to this day.
Keith just mentioned that you are always willing and looking for the new way, the new technology, the hot thing. Not everybody is like that. A lot of people fall into this works, it's working for me, I'm going to stay with it. Where does that curiosity come from?
Probably, I guess, thinking about it, I never thought about it until right now. It's just a matter of what makes me tick, what I go by. I would say that I always wanted to be on top. I wanted to build the best engines, the most powerful engines. I wanted to have the reputation of the engines would live. And to do that, you had to have the latest technology, the latest parts, and the latest methods of doing things. And, I always kept my ear open, and I always was looking for the next thing. And I got this, it's working really good. What can I get? How can I do it better?
Now, Keith, Ed is an LA story as well, and we were marveling at just a couple of elements of your life, Ed, and, I'm going to mention a couple. Just being in the epicenter of the speed movement when you mentioned, the Dry Lakes and Bonneville and, when drag racing emerged, being in a shop with some of the legends, like renting space as you're just getting started, like all of that is incredibly interesting. Like that region where the energy was, TV Tommy, one of your first clients, all very interesting. But to me, the idea that your uncle is the founder of Pink's Hot Dogs, that just sells it. That's as LA as it gets.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And my uncle was my dad's brother, and he was a real character. And originally, he was an accountant, and he just didn't like being an accountant. He wanted to do something else. And my aunt, his wife, had a flower shop where they sold flowers, and he wanted to do something else. So he decided that he was going to get himself a little stand and sell hot dogs. And he started out in 1938 with a little push cart on Melrose and La Brea in that area, selling hot dogs from a push cart. And he was a real character, and people liked him, and they bought his hot dogs, and he saved his money, and pretty soon he put up an actual little hot dog stand in the corner. And it just grew and grew and grew, and he was very diligent in doing business, and like I say, everybody liked him. He was a real character. And it got to the point where he had this big hot dog stand on the corner of Melrose and La Brea, and he ended up owning that whole corner, which, today that's crazy, the way things are. The corner of Melrose and La Brea, he owned it all. And to this day, the hot dog stand is still going. His daughter Beverly and son Richard and Richard's wife are running the hot dog stand, and it is one of these places in Los Angeles that you go to.
It's a tourist attraction for people around the world, and Keith and I were talking about it. I have stood in the line. I've enjoyed the Pink's hot dogs. Of course, they do have a concession that comes out to the Winter Nationals and Finals at Pomona, and you can have a Pink's hot dog out at the racetrack, which is even better because the line isn't quite as long. But just amazing. Now, Keith, dive in here because it's your job to be the cutting edge of technology. And here you have Ed, who has worked on just about everything, has designed engines from scratch, has worked with nitromethane, has designed midget engines, IndyCar engines, etc. And so his experience is so vast. When you guys have a conversation or when things, you're bouncing around like what's going to work, where does a conversation like that start, Keith?
It generally started right off with Ed telling me what he's working on. Hey, I got one of these, and this is what it's got, and what can we do better? And And honestly, that's how the conversation kind of started with Ed and I in the very first place. The first time I met Ed, there was a pretty neat race they used to put on here in Phoenix, and I miss it dearly. It was called the Copper Classic. And the Copper would have Indy cars. You could have, the Northeast Big Block Modified. You'd have Southwest Tour. You'd have Silver Crown cars. You had just this really neat mix of different things. There was something for everybody at that race, and unfortunately it doesn't exist anymore. But I was there. It was my early days of working at Total Seal, and I'm walking through the pits, and there's Ed working on, I'm pretty sure it was a Ford, midget engine. And we just got talking, in the pits, and what do you have? What can you do? And that's where it started, because at the time you were pretty much limited to, whatever you could buy for a shelf set of rings, whether it be Speed Pro or whoever at the time. And it's like, well, I think we could do this, and I think we could do that. And it was just that energy between us, that synergy of bouncing ideas back and forth. What do you think? Can we do this? Can we make it thinner? Can we make it smaller? What about coatings? Is there a better coating? Is there something that would last longer? And we just, we start asking, he's asking questions, I'm answering questions, I'm bouncing questions by him, he gives me his feedback, and we eventually drill down to what we both kind of agree. I think this would be pretty cool. Let's make this, let's try this. And Ed, I don't think there was one time that we came up with something that Ed didn't go, yeah, let's do that, let's try that. It wasn't like, nah, that's not going to work. I don't think that's good. No, he was always open to, let's give it a try. And that's how our relationship's always been. And then once he tried that and he liked it, it was that good enough? Oh, heck no. He'd let that run for a couple months, but then we got to do better. Always the case.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it up, because, every time I see Keith at one of the automotive shows, I always, the first thing, after I say hi to him and so we shake hands, I always say, what's new?
Every time.
What's new in the ring department? I'm always trying to make my engines better, and it pretty well starts with the piston ring. That's essential. The piston is another part that's essential to that. Then you get into camshafts and so forth throughout the engine, but rings was a big deal to me, and I wanted to have the very best, and I wanted to have the latest. I didn't want to have in my engine one type of ring when there's something else out there that Total Seal is making it that would be better. I had to have that.
Yeah, and that's absolutely Ed. It was, like I say, not to keep going back to it, but always, like you say, Ed's an optimizer. He's looking for, like he said, once he plays with the camshaft, he's going to nail down that camshaft. And I'm sure he's after the cam guys too. But as Ed said, every time he comes to the show, to this day, to the last time I saw him at the show, what do you got that's new? And we're looking at total conform rings and gas ported top rings, and how do we bring that technology into whatever his latest project is, and that constant push. And it's it was a big part of it. And then all the way into cylinder honing, we spent so many hours talking about getting the cylinders right and what can we do to optimize that part of it, because as Ed said, it's all got to work together. So it's optimizing all those pieces to keep bringing his stuff to the forefront and making it better.
Yeah, very true.
Ed, when did you realize that? We've been doing this podcast now. We've had a lot of engine builders, legends, come on board. You have had the longest arc of experience, born in 1931, and seen maybe the most technology change initially. You're dealing with factory parts as best as you could make them, pulling them out of junkyards and all. So some of the things that we know now were not even possible to know. You couldn't even have measured a lot of these things. But there had to be some times in your early beginning of engine building, and I know Vic Edelbrock, and Edelbrock was a big part of your career, that you were able to kind of get in with them, and there was some mentoring going on. But the understanding that if you don't have the seal, the other stuff doesn't matter as much. When did you realize that?
When I met Keith Jones.
That can't be. That was
well, thank you, Ed.
Well, that's the truth. In the early days, you run what was available. You used what was available, and you made it work. There weren't any speed shops per se, equipment places like there are today. So much of the stuff you had to make yourself or have somebody make it for you. The engine builder today has got it made compared to when I started, because now if he gets involved with the right people, he can get the right piston rings when you deal with Total Seal. And with the piston companies out there, you can get the right pistons and the right connecting rods and the right crankshaft. Where back when I started, none of that was available. There were all kinds of rings available, but they were just standard piston rings. And so you would try to pick the one that you felt would work the best. And when Total Seal came into the business, they kind of rewrote the book on piston rings, I think.
Wow. And go ahead.
And there's other companies that made other parts for the engines that pretty much kind of did the same thing. But with Total Seal, when they came into the business, or when I was aware of them, it opened up a whole new thing as far as piston and ring seal.
Yeah, I appreciate those kind words so much, Ed. We've really tried hard to not be the same as everybody else, and that's been kind of the goal since I've been here, and I think kind of the goal since Joe started the company in '67 was to not be like everybody else and not just offer what everybody else has, and the real important part is to listen. I've said this before. When I first started here, one of the first calls I made was to Warren Johnson and asking Warren, what are you using now and what don't you like about it? And and listening to that response. And it's the same thing, with Ed. What do you have now? And I've got this ring pack, and what would you like it to do better? And talking about that, and then seeing what we can do to make that happen. Whether it be the diamond finish process, or really tightening the tolerances up, or the gapless process. We offer a lot of variations on everything, and then even combinations of those variations. But listening to what the person wants and what we think it'll take to get them there, and that's and again that just speaks volumes to Ed and his willingness to reach out and try different things, because there are a lot of guys out there that good enough is good enough. That's what we ran back in the day, and they were always good enough, and we'll say that they're not the guys that are on this podcast right now, and there's a reason that Ed's here, and it's because he is always been willing to if not, as he said, get the best part out there, make the best part out there. If he couldn't get it, he made it. That's the innovation.
No, that's very true.
When we get a legend such as yourself on this show, it's always a little challenging, because the stories that you have, I'm sure you've interacted with, you've been around, you've watched the greatest characters in American motorsport firsthand, the people you've hung out with. And then there's the cars and the sheer variety of cars, just in terms of manufacturers, like just off the top, including the drag racing cars and the coupes back in the day, but going into Indy cars, sports cars, Porsche, Buick at the Indy cars, IRL development for Nissan, Ford, Toyota with midgets. You have been able to lay your hands and work on and design for all the great manufacturers. And so it's challenging for Keith and I. Like, I would love to just sit back and pepper you with questions about stories about, Shirley Muldowney and that kind of stuff. But the designing engines for Nissan, the designing engines for Toyota and Ford, working with Indy cars and that Buick program, those things I'm sure are very interesting to our listeners as well. So let me ask you this way. When you think back at these projects, like the characters versus the cars, the engines versus the people, what sticks out in your mind? Like, what would you like to share with us? Because we think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I've dealt with a lot of characters, but I guess that's one of the things that keeps me vitalized. I've been involved with A.J. Foyt and Al Unser Sr. and Bobby Unser and Ari Lyondike in the Indy cars and in drag racing. Don Perdome and Tom McEwen and Richard Tharp, Ed McCullough. In the midgets, I had Tony Stewart. God, there's so many great guys that I was privileged to work with and work for. I tell you a funny story. Every racing series that I was involved with had their moments. And I can remember one time at the Speedway when this particular car and driver, they were out and they're making laps, and the driver came to me and said, he says, it doesn't feel like it's really pulling off the corner. He says, I don't want to knock your engine, but he says, it's just not accelerating off the corner. And that's a big thing with those cars. They got to come off the corner to go fast down the straightaway. So that night when qualifying was over for the day, I got with the chief mechanic and said I wanted to check the engine over, and he said, fine, go ahead. And they were working on the car. And I mean, I almost had the engine apart. And this is a Cosworth DFX turbocharged engine. And I found nothing wrong. And pretty soon the chief mechanic came over to me and told me, he says, did you find anything wrong engine-wise? And I says, no, I really didn't. And he says, I'm not surprised. He says, we found some things with the car. And I said, oh, great. And in those days, when the chief mechanic would work on the car, most of the time they didn't get into detail with the driver, what they were doing. The driver would come back from a couple laps and tell him what he feels, and the mechanic chief would work on the car and make changes and so forth. But they didn't go into great detail. Well, I did this and I did that. That was not discussed. So the next day, they go out on the track, and the car is blistering fast. And the driver came to me and put his arm around my shoulders and says, Ed, he said, I don't know what you did to that engine last night, but boy, it's really fast. And that's some of the stuff that went on. I can tell you another thing that happened in drag racing with Don Perdome. We were at Ontario Motor Speedway when they used to have I think it was the Super Nationals there. And he went down on a qualifying run, and as he's going down the racetrack, I heard him shut off. And when they got the car back to the pits, I went over to Snake and I said, why did that looked like a pretty good run? Why did you shut off? And he says, there's something wrong. He says, when I got to about halfway track, the RPM started coming up more than I think it should. Now that's a pretty good set of ears, because those things are accelerating so fast that how he could hear or feel the RPM starting to come up when it really shouldn't. Well, they got everything apart, and what it had done, this is back in this is before the crawler glides. Was a regular clutch. And it had a 3-disc clutch in it, and the hub in the center disc, it sheared all the rivets. And it was only working on 2 discs. And that, I can remember that today, and that happened, I hate to think how many years ago. But he actually, it sheared the hub in the center disc, which released some of the holding power of the clutch. And he felt the RPM go up and shut the engine off.
Wow.
And to me, that's amazing.
One of our greats, and there is more evidence to it. And the fact that you got to see him, let's just talk Snake for a second, through his whole run. You were the old master. What did you think about being the old master in your 30s, by the way? That tells you about the sport, though, is that it was a bunch of young guys out there living it.
Yeah, I don't remember which one of the journalists of the papers and magazines at the time named me that, but I think when I got that name hooked on me, I think I was probably I'm 35 years old.
Yeah, it's too young to be called the old anything.
That's right. Yeah, but I didn't look at it bad because to me it was good just to be called something rather than ignored.
Right.
You know.
You were on the map. Keith?
Like, you're talking about drag racing and, in Snake, feeling that RPM come up just, speaks volumes about just that seat of the pants. I mean, he clicked it off. Yeah. Not only did he save the engine, but he could have been saving his own legs. I mean, if that clutch would have exploded, we know what, we all know what that was like. I mean, just to feel that little difference. But for Ed to be, again, to be involved with all the different things that you've been involved with, from, IndyCar and the Cosworth Turbo days and, into midget, is there, the question I have, is there any one of those that was, really your favorite, or were they all as challenging? Was there one you enjoyed more than the other?
No, my favorite was always the one that won.
I love that.
Yeah, but the engine project that we did, it was the hardest of any one we've done, was the Infinity IRL engine, because it was underfunded. Somehow or other, Nissan Infinity got fed a bunch of bull that what it was going to cost to do it, and they went with it, and they came to me to ask me if I would take the project on, which meant it was developing a complete engine, and which we did. And we were lucky. We won one race, which is amazing because, I mean, the thing was underfunded. I mean, so much of it was done with smoke and mirrors. I look back at that and kind of shake my head that we were able to accomplish what we did. I had 30 people working for me. I have an engineer, and we had to do the whole thing, and it was the toughest one that I think that I've ever done. I've had some engine programs that I did that were really, really good. When we did the Toyota midget engine, I went down to TRD. And I had my engineer with me, and we sat at a meeting. They had 3 or 4 engineers, and the fellow that is in charge of the Toyota's racing program, period. In fact, I think he's retired now. His name was Lee White. And we had this meeting, and he brought out a valve cover and a cylinder head. He says, "This is what we have to bring to the party. You need to do everything else." And we took the program on. The best part, the budget didn't have a topping to it. Whatever it took, this is what we got to do. And from the day we started on that project, and that was designing the block, the valve train, crankshaft, rods, pistons, dry sump system, everything. From the day we started, the day it ran the first time was 9 months. And the first race we ran was at the Copper Classic in Phoenix on the mile. And the car with that engine set quick time and won the race. So that would probably be one of the best ones we've done. And that was in 2006. And today in 2020, that engine is still the engine to beat in the midget deal. That is the engine, which is amazing.
That is amazing. That is amazing. On the engine development angle, Ed, that's so beyond my understanding, but I like to think about it. When you design an engine, what are the parameters that go into deciding what it's going to be? Bore versus stroke versus this versus that. Is it the application where the power needs to come in? What elements do you consider when you're doing a clean sheet design like that?
Well, with the midget, what first thing we need to do is find out from the rules maker of the association what the limits are, what you can do and what you can't do. And then the next thing is you're going to find out what parameters the engine's got to run at. A midget engine, I would say, of the series similar to that, or like that sprint cars and Silver Crown and especially midget, is the fact that engine has to make good power or good torque from about 3,000 to 9,000. Where, a lot of series like the IndyCar, that engine runs in about a 400 RPM span. Where the midget, they get down to 3,000 RPM. So the bore has a lot to do with it, and the stroke. So all those variables that come into it to figure out exactly what bore you should have, what stroke you should have, what length rod, compression ratio, what you need in the way of camshaft. And you go through a development program. You pick out to start with, and I guess that comes from just experience. Where you start, because we weren't blessed with having a whole computer system set up where we can do all the analysis and everything on the computer like big budget teams have. Because then you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 different engineers with different programs, software in their computers, figuring out all of that, bore, stroke, rod length, and so forth. I didn't have the luxury of having that. I had to kind of go by what I felt, what I, through my experience, what was good to start with. And then we'd get on the dyno, and we'd run the engine, and we'd find out just how good I was or how much I missed it. And we make the changes.
Keith?
And well, I've got to say, as far as that midget engine goes, the piece that you landed on is absolutely stupendous, Ed. But one of the parameters that I think you had when you designed that was that somebody in the engine shop had to have little tiny, like little 10-year-old baby fingers, because you people stuck some head bolts and studs in place. I'm like, how in the heck do you even get to that? and you know what I'm talking about, because there's some fasteners in some places. I have no idea how you got that in there.
I guess the best way to explain it is there certain pieces that go in first, and if you don't get those in first, it's really tough bolting stuff together. So I never really looked at it that way. I mean, it wasn't that hard to work on. There were engines that I've worked on that much, like the Porsche, when we got that program for Jim Busby. I mean, that was a tough program, but it worked out really good, because at the time, when I first met Jim Busby, he was drag racing, and we did drag race engines for him, and he and I became good friends. And then later on, when he got out of drag racing and he went into sports car racing, he ran an open wheel car that was similar to a Formula 5000 car. It was called Formula A. And we built engines for him for that. And then when he left that, he went into Porsches. And he ran the 962 Porsche, which is really a fabulous car. And one day he calls me on the phone and he says, I want to come out and have lunch with you tomorrow. I got something I want to talk to you about. And I said, okay. And he came out, we had lunch, and he said, I want you to take over my 962 engine project. And I said, what? And he says, I want you to take over my 962 engine project. And I says, Jim, I've never worked on a Porsche in my life before. I know what the engine looks like from the outside, but I've never seen the inside of one or anything like it. And he says to me, well, did you forget how to build an engine? And I said, well, it's a little different than that. He says, I want you to do them. And I said, okay. And I said, but, I need to learn about it. He says, at that time, he had a big sponsorship with BF Goodrich Tire Company. And he says, we're going to send you to Germany, to Weissach, to Porsche's R&D Center for 2 weeks. And you're going to go to school and learn how to do them. So I went to Weissach in Germany, which is their R&D center. And it took a couple of days for the mechanics there to realize that I wasn't there for the overthrow of the German government or over there to try to take Porsche over or anything like that, that I was a real guy trying to learn the engine. And then everything went fine. I worked there 2 weeks and worked right alongside the German engine builders and watched them run them on a dyno. And then I came home and I showed my guys how to do the Porsche engines. And we took that engine project over. And at the time, of course, you got to understand one thing. At that time in the class that these cars run at, which is the top of the line class with the not production, but the race car Porsche cars. Porsche's not racing anybody else; they're only racing themselves. So they didn't run the engine at full tilt. Where with Busby, he wanted to have the fastest Porsche out there, and he wanted to beat everybody, especially the Porsche sponsored cars. So when we first started that project, the engine is made about 675 horsepower, and this is a 6-cylinder, air-cooled, opposed cylinders, turbocharged on gasoline, which is something that I had never worked on. I worked on turbocharged cars, but never an air-cooled car, and never turbocharged on gasoline, air-cooled, all those combinations together. And we worked on that project, and Jim gave us a full go-ahead to do an R&D program on the engines to try to make more power. And when we got done with the project, the engines made right at 850 horsepower, and they were the fastest Porsches out there. He had good drivers driving them. Bob Wallach, who unfortunately is not with us anymore, and Mauro Baldi. These were really top drivers, and that was a great experience. Had a lot of fun doing that. Learned a lot, and in each engine program you do, there's always things from the last one you did that kind of spill into the one you're doing. That there's things you can take into it. You don't have to learn a whole new deal. There's plenty of things from the last project you did that can go into that project too.
Again, I appreciate that so much, and just telling those stories there, because that's all stuff I knew you were involved, but I didn't know you raised the power level that much, and that's just amazing. Is that part of what I know towards? Let's say that towards the days of at Ed Pink Racing Engines, after you sold and then began to retire, the shop's really kind of taken on a lot of this historic and vintage race car stuff. Is that what kind of preceded that? Were you kind of steering it into doing those things? Because that is, I'll tell you, when you guys would call me and talk to me about the different projects and the different cars and the history of what was coming through your shop, it blew me away. Because you guys get on, oh, that's this car and it won this race and it won that race, and this legend drove it and that legend drove it, and I was just always fascinated by that. I thought that was extremely interesting and very, very cool. Again, we could talk about it for hours, but is that kind of what led the direction of the shop? It was working on those cars?
Yes. And it got down to the point, like in the IndyCar thing, it got down to when Elmore came into the program, building engines for Indianapolis cars. So now you got Cosworth and Elmore, and they didn't want their information to leak out. So now it went into leased engines. And people like myself that had an independent engine shop, we found ourselves not being able to do them anymore because none of the teams owned the engines. And the reason for it is Elmore didn't want their stuff out in the public for somebody else to see what they're doing, and Cosworth was the same way. So as race things happened, and you look for new agendas, new things to do, and being my shop, we had done so many different engines. It was natural that a lot of the vintage people came to us with engines. Like right now, the shop is doing all the Singer Porsche engines, and that's a company that takes I think 89. There's about 2 or 3 years that they do where they do a complete remanufacture of the car, and then my old company has the project to do the engines, and they're beautiful cars. I mean, they call it the Porsche reimagined.
Yep, incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's kind of what it led to, and then after I left, I was bored to death, which we started to talk about earlier today. I was bored to death. I needed something to do because, I love the engines. I love the people that you're involved with because they're all characters. Everyone's a different personality and character. And so I had some people call me that used to race professionally that now are retired, and they're doing vintage stuff, or they're building a classic car or a hot rod. And they said, and I had them call me and say, well, I'm doing this car and I need this engine. Would you do this engine for me? And I figured, yeah, I have a hard time saying no. It's my biggest problem. So now I have a little shop. We built a couple Ford flatheads for people, and we've done the 427 single red cam engine that we did back in the drag race days for Lou Baney's dragster that Perdome drove that won a lot of races. So that's what we're doing now.
Wow. So retirement has not been the kick your feet up on the couch and watch TV that so many other people do, and we wouldn't have it any other way. We could speak with you for hours upon hours. Obviously, you have so many great stories, and we really appreciate you taking the time. As we get to the end of A Hidden Horsepower, though, there's a couple of things that I always like to do. First of all, I like to ask about something that didn't work, because we encourage people to try. And it's not always going to work. And, you can't forge new ground or invent something new without some failures along the way. I wonder, is there any glaring example in your engine building career of something that you thought might be a great idea and it wasn't?
No, I can't think of any.
Even better. Yeah.
No, I can't. No. I think one of the biggest reasons that I can't think of any failures is because I had the greatest people tutoring me growing up and the great people working for me in the shop. I mean, I had Vic Edelbrock Sr., I had Junior, I had Bobby Meeks, Don Toll, I had Chicky Hiroshima, You know, I worked with Eddie Meyer. I had Eddie Meyer and Bud Meyer. So I'd like to say I did this, but I can't really say that because the biggest thing I can say I did this is I had great people supporting me, making sure I didn't screw up.
That makes a lot of sense. Keith, any final questions for Mr. Ed Pink?
Now, my question there is, Ed, keep going. It's not even a question. It's just a statement. Keep going. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to do this for us and to talk with us. It's always an honor, to speak with you, and I thank you again, my friend.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, yes.
Believe me.
And finally, a bit of advice for the next generation. We like to think that there are some, younger folks listening to this podcast who they want to make their living in high performance, and they are looking for advice and a way to get a leg up on the competition who's not listening to Hidden Horsepower. Do you have anything you'd want to say to those folks out there?
I would say for anybody that wants to get into this business and they want to be an engine builder, just be dedicated to what you do. Never accept that's good enough. If you're going to do it, be the best you can be. And be true to what you want to do. Don't strip any nuts.
Yes, we'll try. We will try. Ed, thank you very much. And I would also imagine that a lot of the people that you've interacted with over the years might check out this podcast at some point. And we talked about your career arc. Is there anything, you got an opportunity to talk to a lot of people at one time right now. And is there anything you'd want to say? You've already mentioned you've been able to work directly with the greatest of the greats along the way. But, is there any thought that you'd want to put to cap it all off, the career that you've had?
No, the thing is, I appreciate the people that I've been involved with. I've had a great time. I started when I was about 16 years old. I worked for Lou Baney at his Golden Eagle Speed Shop gas station in like 1948, 49. And here we are, 2020, and I'm 89 years old. And I'm just as pumped up as I ever have been on engines. So
super exciting. Such a great example. Ed, thank you so much for joining us on Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal. Just a great conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time for us.
Thank you very much, and I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Ed. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon, my friend. Be safe out there. And like you say, just, again, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Mr. Ed Pink with us here on Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal. Keith, that was awesome.
Yeah, it certainly was. It's like we said during the podcast, we could spend literally days picking Ed's brain, guys like him that have been around this for so long, and people that you and I think of as legends, to him, hey, that's just a customer. It's amazing that the stories guys like him have, and I love talking to him.
Yeah, it's just so many different angles. And it's very challenging to extract like whatever you're going to get because the guy has got so many amazing stories just coming up in Los Angeles, like being in that part of the country when everything was popping with motorsports and it was all new. Everything was new, brand new. He's the old master and he's in his 30s. That tells you everything you need to know. Think about what other things in our life, like the American life, was really all young people just driving it. And he did some great things, obviously. And as he said, he kept moving into new arenas within engine building. Drag racing ended pretty much 1980. Then he got into IndyCar stuff and then the midget stuff. Just really amazing how he's been able to stay interested and relevant. 89 years old. Just tremendous. This has been one of my favorites.
As is well mine. It's like I say, what a storied career to just keep reinventing yourself every time you rose to the challenge, and then what's the next challenge, and then on to the next thing. I mean, that's not a lot of us can say that, and like I say, he He is now the old master, but even back when he was in his 30s, he was the old master then as well.
So we've got some people out there listening right now that are trying to become a master themselves, or at very least live up to what Ed just said, which is be as good as you can possibly be and have just okay, never be good enough. They are working on their engine projects. They certainly have some free time to do it. And I know you guys at Total Seal are really trying to be helpful to those people putting together their own engines.
Yeah, it's definitely a different time frame out there right now, and we welcome the calls. I'm getting lots and lots of responses about the podcast, all positive, thank you. And guys reaching out to me, asking questions. We've got a lot of guys diving into projects, myself included. I've got some things on the 20-year-long honeydew list. It's like, I think I can probably finally get to that. And I've got a tremendous amount of people diving into all kinds of projects out there, from old restoration stuff to old antique tractors to old dirt bikes. I mean, you name it. It's amazing that the stuff that I'm being asked for rings, and what should we do and how should we do it. So please feel free. You got a question, you're looking for a ring for something that's a little off the wall, not your everyday thing. You can't find rings for your CZ motorcycle in a book anywhere. Call us. We can certainly help you out. You can reach us on the web, totalseal.com. You can email me, keithj@totalseal.com, or feel free to call us, 800-874-2753. We would gladly talk to you guys. Love to hear from you.
And if you have a question that you would like answered on the show, you think it would be interesting to other people out there, by all means, use the social media channels, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, or otherwise, to send the question. You could just email it to Keith, I'm sure. Keith, you're getting a collection of those questions. We have engine builders out there who maybe have a piece of info that they think would be great for sharing, and we'll use it in our next Frequently Asked Questions episode, which I was just listening to the other day, Keith, and I thought it was some of your best work, just really expanding the thought process for someone like me who is not an engine builder, but I can use this knowledge in my day job working at the National Hot Rod Association or my own WFO radio podcast. Having this understanding is very helpful. And so you're broadening the mind of a lot of people out there. And it could be someone with an LS engine that they're doing a rebuild and they're thinking, like, should I try something? And the answer is, yeah, you could try something. So send those questions to either Keith or the social media channels. Now, I didn't tell Ed, though, Keith, that you had never had a Pink's hot dog. I should have. I should have told him that.
Yeah, it was. Well, like you say, it created an opportunity, because if we can get there, like you say, we get to the Auto Club Nationals, we can go there and get the VIP treatment. So I love that. It was like you say, as many times as I've been over there and I've stood in that line and I just couldn't do it. I look forward to having that dog, especially with you and with Ed.
There you go. Pink's with Ed Pink. That would be great. Keith, thank you very much. Great job as usual. Thank you once again, my friend.
Thank you, Joe.
He's Keith Jones, the Director of Technical Sales with Total Seal Piston Rings, totalseal.com. My name is Joe Costello at WFO Joe on Twitter. Also do the WFO Radio podcast. This is Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcast. Write us a review, rate us if you like, if you're enjoying the show. And remember, there are many episodes that you might not have heard. Go back into the archive and check them out. We see those numbers. They're growing every day, every week. People checking out a little Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.